Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the man behind comic sales tracking super site, Comichron. It's John Jackson Miller. Thanks for coming on, John.
Hey, glad to be here.
So we've been talking about this for a little bit. We were talking about when was the right time to talk about all these things, because 2020 has been a year where your world has been, everyone's world has been kind of torn asunder, but now is the right time because your year-end report that Comichron does in partnership with ICV2, specifically Milton Griepp, where you look at, how comics did in it's US and Canada, right?
Yeah, it's U.S. and Canada. We call it North America. There's ways to get at some information in Central America, but really it's much more North America than it was, because one of the things that we did this year was we threw out all of the stuff that was sent from Diamond's North American warehouses to Oceania and Australia, okay, and the West Coast,
gotcha,
or rather the Pacific Rim, rather.
So, this is a big report that looks at really everything. It looks at the book market, it looks at the direct market, it looks at digital and other, which we'll get to other in a little bit. And the big news, as has been shared by many sites, is the biggest year since you started tracking it in your yearly reports with Milton, $1.21 billion versus last year's $1.095 billion. Not only that, but it was the first year where it was just comics that actually crossed the $1 billion mark between the book market and single issues, or excuse me, the direct market. Now, I want to start with this isn't even a process question. I'm interested in whether or not this surprised you. Like, looking at the arc we've seen the last few years, did seeing these results surprise you at all?
No, it's been going up every year since we've been doing it, with the exception of 2017, which was that lull year. And I think you and I did a podcast right at the end of it a couple of years ago, which delves into the whys and wherefores of what happened there, and how at the time we thought it was localized to the direct market. A lot of it had to do with the fact that we just couldn't keep up with the 2016-2015 pace with Star Wars at Marvel and Secret Wars at Marvel and Rebirth at DC. We ended up being down 10% in the direct market in 2017. And we were down a little bit as well in some other markets. So that we had this little speed bump in 2017, but then things start to get stabilized in the direct market, and in the book channel, things just keep going gangbusters, and. We knew, they always do a little bit of a report at the end of the year. So in January, we kind of already knew, the book channel, graphic novels, comics are the healthiest part of the book market, period.
Right.
And so when we knew that, and we knew that comics, we knew that the direct market was up 2%, comic books as part of the direct market were up 4%. We knew that no matter what happened, it was going to net out positive. But we were also fairly sure it was going to net out significantly positive.
Yeah. It always seemed like, just looking at the numbers in the arc for graphic novels in the book market in particular, like I was just kind of waiting for the numbers to come out, because I figured this would be the year that the book market and the comic stores finally flipped, because it had been kind of trending in that direction. Yeah. And that's not to say that like the direct market had a down year, as you've said, What was the direct market overall was up 5%, was it?
The direct market is up 4%. The direct market was up 2%. Comics were up 4%. Graphic novels were down something like 1.5%.
Okay. Yeah. So it seemed like, unless that comic shops were a complete anchor, which they weren't, it was going to be a massive year. And it seemed like it was even more. I guess that was the thing that kind of surprised me a little bit, was that, graphic novels went up by 130 million. Looking through Brian Hibbs's book scan report, you can see it. It's just, it's like the Dogman show out there.
And then we did a couple of things new this year that sort of changed the relative positions of things. One of the things, and it's been requested for a long time by Joe Field and others, is, and Brian has talked about this as well, is the number of graphic novels that retailers were buying from sources other than Diamond.
Right.
And we were never covering that. We had just assumed it was, that in miscellaneous or other. But the problem is, where our miscellaneous bucket had been was in book channels. Was in that 15% of the book trade that is not carried by, not tracked by BookScan. And so what we decided to do is we reassigned some of the dollars from, they remain graphic novels, but we reassigned that from the book channel to the comic shops.
Interesting.
So comic shops picked up from that. However, and this caused some confusion when the numbers came out in some circles. Comic shops actually technically went down 5 million from our 18 number to our 19 number. If you just look at the graphics, if you just look at last year's number,
360 to 355.
Yeah, and that reason is because we did throw out what was outside the U.S.
Right.
Or rather outside North America. So, comic books actually still were up 4%. They were. It's just that the real number for comic books for 2018, had we retroactively made these changes, the real number for that year would have been closer to like 342, 343. We just don't want to go back and change every graphic we've ever done.
Yeah. Oh, but then people can use it as evidence for things that they're very unhappy about. Hey, that is a lot of work, though.
It's confusing. I actually did something I don't do. I actually went on a YouTube site and issued a clarification.
Sure.
In the comments, and the clarification was well received, and I was glad to see that.
That is
because now it was something that I mean, if it's not your habit to wallow in the fine print, you weren't going to catch it.
Yeah, no. I mean, that is the funny thing too, is like when you look at your numbers, all this stuff is spelled out in your actual write-up. Actually, let's start. I'm going to start with the deep nerd stuff before we get into some specific questions. How do you and Milton put this together? Because one thing, when we were emailing, not to take us behind the scenes of our emails and everything, you were talking about, I was asking about the digital stuff, and you were saying that, you guys had to have some more conversations about this stuff. Where does all of this come from? Because is it just straight numbers, or is some of it kind of contextual coming from conversations you're having?
It's a mix. I mean, and it comes from a lot of places. Some are quite exotic. One of the things that's buried in these numbers, in the comics numbers, is I know how many comics, for example, to the actual copy, Marvel sold by subscription through the mail last year.
Wow.
And that comes from its audit bureau. That's that's in here. It's in here very small, but we each have sort of our turf in this. I'm kind of the periodical person, but I also have some graphic novels by virtue of Diamond, and I can at least carry on I would hope a nuanced conversation about what happens in BookScan and what happens in some other places like digital. And he's also dealing with folks. He's
Milton?
Milton. He's got a relationship with NPD BookScan where he's getting information from them. He's got contacts in the digital world from back in the day when he was one of the principals behind Comixology, one of the original board members. And then there's the stuff that we're both working on at the same time, learning about at the same time, like crowdfunding. You wouldn't believe the degree to which he and I ended up both having to hunt down what was really happening with DC in Walmart.
Oh boy!
just for I mean, I worked out exactly how many copies or how many issues came out this year versus last year, and studied about how many copies were showing up per location, and it was clear to me in early June, I think was when I had just done it, that they were about to give it up, and indeed they gave up.
Yeah.
No, I discovered that there were issues that were just sitting there, not being changed out. There were books from November in the counter dump there in June.
Wow. Yeah, that whole thing is so weird. It's such an odd replacement product going from those DC Giants to these kind of grab bag style ones. Although I have a certain amount of nostalgia for that, but
Well, they go back earlier than I was even alive. I mean, the DC comic pack started in 1962.
oh yeah,
And they would actually tell you on the pack what books were inside, so you didn't have to rip them open.
but that's the not fun part. The fun part is opening it up and finding out that you got 2 X-Men comics and like 5 issues of the name.
Well, the hard part is finding an intact one of those bags from those days for that exact reason.
Yeah,
Because they are valuable.
really?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Oh yeah. Well, I wouldn't say the ones from the 90s are, but if you got an original Star Wars bag with the big Star Wars logo on it, that's something.
Wow.
And of course, the comics inside are usually in pretty good shape. So,
Yeah.
Hey, they're in a bag.
Exactly. Well, so just based off of what you're saying, it seems like you more or less start with a whole ton of information, and then from there it's almost like kind of like chipping away at it, trying to find out what the real truth is, like where this bucket should end up, how much of this should count and how much of it shouldn't. So like,
That's right.
How long is this process? Is it like something that you and Milton are really kind of chipping at for several months?
He approached me to do this 7 years ago. Actually 8 years ago at San Diego. We digital was coming on, and book channel was starting to be a much bigger thing. He knew that I had for years. What Comichron has had that nobody else has is I've got a number for all a diamond, and I've had that number since 2003 when I began being able to calculate it from one of the facts that it put out and has been putting out. And I know that number is accurate. And they've also told me it's accurate over the years. And so I've got an overall figure because, what you see in Diamond's, top 500 graphic novels is, not anywhere close to all the money that they're making.
Right.
So anyway, we timed it back in those days to come out at San Diego or the week of San Diego. That as San Diego became much more of a noisy event. We started slipping it back earlier in the year. But last year, because of other things we had going on, and this year because of what the world was doing, it just made more sense to do it later. I think our first conversations usually are in. Well, we'll talk about what's just happened at the end of the year usually, but we don't get on the phone for our big let's hash this out thing until fairly close to the report.
Wow. I assume that you guys. Well, I guess you guys probably.
No, we have emails going back and forth all this time.
Right.
The actual phone call, which is one of the geekiest phone calls probably ever, and it's usually a couple of hours. And that's kind of been a fun annual thing for us.
That's awesome. Well, okay, so I just want to break it down really quick. So the different levels are there's the comic shops, aka the direct market. There's book market, aka bookstores and Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's, on top of that, there's digital, which, is a crucial, thing that I don't think people realize, because people are like, constantly wondering why it's plateauing. It's just the ones that are being sold directly, like they're individual issues. It's not subscription services or anything like that, like Marvel Unlimited or Comixology Unlimited, et cetera, which is certainly, where the trend is headed in that type of thing. And then there's other, the nebulous other, which in your breakdown you said includes the newsstand or periodical sales through specialty retail and mass merchant chains and crowdfunding, Kickstarter, et cetera channels. So, like, the other is really interesting to me because, I know it's such a small piece of the pie, but at the same time, it seems to me that crowdfunding does have, like, especially in this new pandemic world order, it could have, maybe increasing relevance.
Yeah.
how when it comes to that part, how is that stuff gathered? Is it just like basically mad Googling, or is it like I
Well,
don't?
it's a mix of both of our usual things. I mean, Milton, for example, we didn't mention it with regard to the book channels, but a big part of book channels is book fairs,
Oh
and
yeah,
he has sources, with Scholastic, with the book fairs, with the various places that he draws upon. And likewise here, he does interviews with he's done interviews with Kickstarter. What I tend to be, more the person that wallows in the how much of this really is comics part of it.
oh sure,
And I really do think that is significant with this. As again, I've also had to explain here recently that it's not our goal to try to show all the ways in which people who are in comics make money.
right,
It is not our goal to show the ways that all the publishers that are out there can make money from comics related things. We don't show, we don't count Marvel's action figures that it sells or whatever. We don't count, the sketches that artists do, or the original art pages that artists do. There's just a whole lot of not related to the book. And then there's, in many cases, there's just straight donations to the creator that are taking place in a lot of these programs, or a lot of these projects. And that's great. We're glad it's there. We don't deny that it's there. We really want to get it down to just what's transacting for the physical books, and that's the only way that it can be in line with everything else that we're doing. And so you'll see a number for Kickstarter for last year, and it's much higher than what you would think it would be based on what we've got. But we kind of have applied a variety of tests to things to say, okay, yeah, how much of this is the book? I mean, if you think about it, PBS is a source of book sales.
yeah,
Because they have their campaigns. If you contribute at the $120 level, you'll get a copy of this book. But probably the book is still a $20 book.
right.
And the other $100 is to support the programming, or to support the cause, or to support the whatever. If a big chunk of the money is going to these extras, we're really going to look at that differently. And if there's a hardcover that's offered, and that's a $60 portion of it, yeah, sure, that counts, because we do $60 hardcovers in regular print as well.
Yeah.
But this is something where it's always going to be, open to question, what you count and what you don't. My old boss, my late boss at Krause Publications, Chet Krause, who managed all these magazines in these collectible fields, said, there's only one category in any field that covers everything, and that's miscellaneous. At some point, you have to decide what is your test for what counts and what doesn't, and then you got to stick with it.
Yeah, I hadn't even thought about how nebulous some of the Kickstarter stuff is, because it's like, you look at ones that are like, oh, $5,000 and you can come out and you can watch me work or something like that. And it's like, do you count that in sales? Does that really count as a comic sale? Probably not. So it is interesting how, I bet a lot of people think of this as like a purely objective exercise, but some of it requires real subjectiveness.
It does. And again, our purpose has never been to do, horse race. Between, and Comichron, we don't do horse race kind of stuff. Marvel versus DC versus whatever, but we know people want to do it. Likewise, we know people want to actually compare crowdfunding to traditional means, or want to compare, graphic novels to comics. And, in all cases, we're like, this is not a competition. This is, even though people may want it to be. And,
Yeah.
and in particular, there's, if you don't have periodicals, our graphic novel number is going to be a lot lower too.
So I have one channel that wasn't mentioned that I don't think should count, but it is interestingly active this year in terms of the conversation. Back issues. Like Diamond talked about how they were thinking about getting into the back issues game when Steve Jeppy went on Dan Shaheen's show on YouTube. like by all accounts, it's like the collector market is doing really, really well right now.
Yeah.
Is that something you wouldn't include strictly because it's not quote unquote new comics, or is it something?
Yeah.
Is that it?
I would love people to include it as part of the universe of comics. I would love people to understand that it is part of the money that people make. I would love it if that happened. You know, by the same token that we when we're talking about these sales, we're assuming everything's sold at cover price.
Right.
We're not discounting for what Amazon knocked things down to, but at the same time, we're also not including markup. When retailers buy a $3.99 comic book and mark it up to $15, we're not capturing that money. That money is important, and if you get rid of periodicals, that money disappears as well, at least in terms of the new business. And as far as how big that business is, I've back when I was at Comics Buyer's Guide, I knew it was between $100 and $200 million a year. That was in a time where eBay was a lot more transparent in terms of me being able to actually harvest everything that was in it and what was going down. It is a lot harder now to find out what the population of material is that's up there. But as I mentioned to you before we went on air here, traffic at Comichron, since the monthly numbers have been coming out, is now sort of down to the more than half of the readers that are just there for the historical sales data, the back issues, that sort of thing, the collectors, and the traffic that we are sending to eBay, that we're hearing about from eBay, is at an all-time high.
Wow.
And so that is people clicking through to get to eBay auctions for things, and that's a reflection of the fact that there's just not as many places to get comics the way you normally do. Conventions are completely gone, so you're going mail order. The question has always been: do you count the person who buys a comic book secondhand as part of the readership? Historically, the publishers did when they were selling their ads. It's called pass-along readership.
Sure.
And the theory was that comics would have a pass-along readership of between 8 and 10 people per copy. That was what everybody tended to say in the 60s and 70s. Well, those numbers are even higher now, I'm sure, for those comics back then. They're probably lower for more recent books. But yeah, it's part of the universe, it's part of the audience, but I don't see how you could begin to track it.
Oh, yeah.
And I want people to know that it's important. I want people to, I really, really wish, the folks that want the pamphlet, as they use the phrase, or the floppy, as I hate that phrase. Brian Hibbs and I were both mentioning that in the podcast the other day. We despise that phrase or that word. The people who want it to go away both don't understand that, well, that's how we get most of the graphic novels, but also there is an attached economy to that material, and a lot of people disdain that economy out of hand because they dislike variants, or they find the whole flea market aspect of things at conventions unseemly, or they want literature to simply be the driving factor behind everything. But I'm sorry, it's a physical item, it's a commodity. People trade it.
Yeah.
It's gonna be. And if periodicals stopped tomorrow, there would still be over 10 billion comic books out there in circulation, between 10 and 20 billion that I believe are out there in circulation. But it certainly helps to continue priming the pump with new material.
And that's just early 90s Marvel. I actually, this is a funny, like, really bizarre story when you think about the history of comics. I bought this mystery box from Mile High Comics recently just because Chuck Rosansky was doing those during the pandemic, and I found it to be a really interesting idea. And I opened it on Instagram Live, and I did a Marvel one, and I did a dollar bin one, and the dollar bin one was hilarious, but the Marvel one actually had a still polybagged copy of X-Force #1 in it. And it's amazing to think of how many people were buying that so they could fund their next vacation home.
Oh
and
yeah.
it ended up being in a mystery box like 30 years later. It's pretty wild.
Oh yeah. Oh
But
yeah.
the fascinating thing about back issues is if you asked me 5 years ago, especially in my conversations with retailers, I probably would have told you that I don't like, while I am a ardent supporter of single issue comics, but by most conversations, back issues were a non-factor when it came to comic shops themselves. And the weird thing is I've found that there's not just in the sense, I mean, clearly like Diamond has recognized that there's a value there because they've started discussing things like that, but it seems like there's been a real resurgence there, and it's kind of inexplicable to me, but at the same time not, because I read an article just the other day about how there's been a resurgence in baseball or sports cards because the nostalgia factor. And I think the nostalgia factor is something that people really underrate. People don't feel nostalgia for a collection of Kingdom Come. They might feel nostalgia for a copy of Kingdom Come #1, though, because they remember reading it when they were a kid, and they're like, this comic rules.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I think people, I don't know. I don't want to say that they sleep on nostalgia, but I think people forget about the emotions that people have tied to these things.
Well, that was one of the things that we were selling at Krause when we were doing these hobby magazines. I had used the phrase that nostalgia was actually a physiological force, because yes, you can pick up a comic book, and particularly if it is the comic book that you had, for example, that I was reading when I was on spring break when I was 15. I can remember what I got from 7-Eleven, to eat. It was a grape Slurpee with Razzles candy or whatever, and where I read it, and I remember everything about that time.
Right.
It makes the neurons fire.
Totally. I mean, I always love seeing. It's funny, like Tom Brevoort follows I forgot what it is. It's like some spinner rack.
Yep.
Twitter account, and he'll always share which comics he bought from like that week, like 30 years ago or 40 years ago or whatever. But on this topic, looking at the numbers, as I said, I'm a supporter of single issue comics. However, and there's some people who I have long had discussions with on the premise that they're dead or that they're dying. But the one thing I am curious about is whether or not you think that new single issue comics have hit a ceiling. Like, are they as high as they'll ever get, in your opinion?
No, I don't think so. I mean, Detective 1000, ended up, being, we ended up having 3 or 4 comics in the last 2 years that were close to the 500,000 level. I mean, that was significant. That was a big deal.
Right.
And it's the monthly comic. We've had this flattening of the curve, not to use that phrase in this light anymore. Maybe I should kill that phrase.
If the shoe fits, it fits.
Well, but that was what had been happening for years, was that there were fewer and fewer blockbusters, and it was a much the gradation between the top sellers and the lower sellers was balancing out, because the books at the bottom of the charts were selling better. And that dynamic has continued, but we did get some significant blockbuster, single issues over the last few years. And so I think it's entirely, the number of periodicals that are sold is a function of the number of comic shops.
Right.
And that's what it's going to be going forward. And, I think there's going to be particular interest in comics from this pandemic era. I think Jeppy got in trouble online. He got in trouble online for mentioning it, but it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. The comics that come out now are gonna be more valuable than the comics that came out in January. Period. It doesn't matter. It's absolutely true. It's supply.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fundamental. It's going to be built off of shops ordering. Well, I mean, I would say theoretically shops ordering less. A lot of shops I've talked to are actually ordering more because returnability is such a easy option right now. But I don't know. I don't think it. So here's the thing. I think that it's a fine term when you're using it privately to talk about this.
I wouldn't have said. I'm not sure I would have said it out loud. But
yeah, exactly.
But now that he's broken Trump, so to speak, I can say it's absolutely true. It's absolutely true. Brian Hibbs mentioned on Monday. There are no reorders available on comics from Lunar
Right.
right now. They're printing exactly to FOC, or at least they did this last week. That means that there's a limited commodity.
Right. And thus, I mean, it is interesting to see all this happen as so many kind of collector apps have kind of popped up and kind of taken, I mean,
Yeah.
God, like when you look at like a, what is it, Punchline, like the Joker character that came up, and like, I mean, I swear to God, they're like forensic scientists on Key Collector Comics, like looking at this stuff and seeing how many orders are happening, and et cetera, et cetera. And then like, I don't know, it's one of the interesting things about all that is it's even led to a speculator market for later prints, because those have like lower order numbers and they've become more special. And that seems like inherently contradictory to me, but that is a completely different path.
I hear from Nick Kalganis all the time, the guy behind Key Collector, and he's asking questions about what does this really mean on Comichron? What does that really mean?
Sure.
And it's not that it's not that he's creating collectibles, but he's just shining the light on specific things.
Yeah.
And I have told him in the past, I question I question, as somebody who's done price guides for a living before, I question how durable some of these pricing is going to be when somebody is not shining the light on those things.
Right. It's like Wizard all over again in some ways.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean people weren't able to realize those prices then.
Sure. Well, so just a few more questions on the year. So first one, was there anything that really, I mean, besides the things we've talked about, was there anything that stood out to you amongst the numbers as you were putting it all together?
We've mentioned digital to a degree that we just can't get into the numbers in the part of the market that is subscriber based.
Right. And really the position of growth probably.
And we're not going to be able to get into that because there's only one party involved there usually, the publisher's actually doing the sales, and so if they're not going to say, then that's that. I do have the sense from royalties that I see from various things that it can't be much per individual book.
You mean like Knights Old Republic?
Well, like anything. I mean, like any individual issue that is on in one of these services, it works out very much the way that you'll see. The numbers that we hear about are very similar, I would say, to the numbers that the screenwriters hear about their sitcoms or whatever, that they get from the from the Netflix or the whatever money.
Or like musicians from Spotify.
Yeah. We're talking about nobody's going to buy a house. But the entire notion behind the cafeteria plan, if you want to call it that, is that it's all you can eat, and so it's got to be going at fairly low margins, and the money is going to be spread across lots and lots and lots of things. So I don't think we're ever going to have that number. I don't think we're ever going to have a good number on library sales.
That's a big chunk.
Sales to libraries, and it's one thing where I have not pursued it because, again, being graphic novels, it's more in Milton's line. But I'm certain that is. I kind of look at our numbers as a minimum.
Sure.
This is the minimum. That's what we can find.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about Dogman and like Raina by themselves just for libraries, I mean, like that's going to be a big number. And like if that's where Dav Pilkey is now, like Dav Pilkey is probably sitting on a golden throne right now, literally.
Well, and the thing is, he could have more money. This is something that Brian and I have discussed as well, which is, I think in our report, Milton used the phrase in one of his quotes that graphic novels were the preferred format. They're the preferred format by Dav Pilkey. He could decide tomorrow he prefers to do comics and graphic novels. or Scholastic could decide tomorrow to do an anthology monthly or something like that, and they'd actually get the money. It's not the consumer that has preferred that format; it's what they're getting it in. So I mean, it's the consumer has not yet had a choice on something like that, and they may never. I mean, it's the creators that are preferring that format. It's the publishers that are preferring that format, and to a degree, it's the consumers preferring that format. But I do not accept that it's the only way that material could sell.
Interesting. So you're suggesting that the content selecting the medium or the format has kind of driven the divide that exists between comics and graphic novels to a degree?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's look, it's the manufacturers are always responding to where they think demand is. When they stop making as many cassettes and start making more CDs, when they stop making as many VHS and start making more DVDs, that's them acting. But then also there's a point to which they're also driving the customer toward that format by the selecting to take certain products and only sell them in a certain way.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of curation that's going on by the manufacturers, by the publishers, but it's also happening on behalf of the creators. And again, do I think that every comic book, or rather, do I think that every comics property that is being done as a graphic novel only, would necessarily work in periodical form? No, probably, certainly not. Some things are better for the other format. It's just that I think there will always be a dynamic in comic shops that shops are always going to prefer things that are both serialized and collected, because they can sell it to people more than once.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I was gonna poo-poo on your idea, but then I was thinking about the fact I just had Jeff Smith on, and he's living proof that you can do both.
Yeah, I mean, when it's in print, people can buy it multiple times.
Mm-hmm.
And there are original graphic novels that are done, but what would DC do better with? These Black Label books that are just maybe 3-issue miniseries or however many they are. The periodical nature of them is quite limited, 3 or 4 issues. If those went directly to OGN, if those were directly to graphic novel, they wouldn't make near as much money as they do now.
Absolutely. And I'm going to do my one hot take of this. I actually think that direction is maybe the future for DC. Like, I feel like Black Label and like Black Label adjacent products have seemingly, in my conversations with retailers in particular, have been really like, especially over the last year and a half, have been DC's saving grace in comic shops in a lot of ways. Like, their mainline was not doing anything. Now they're doing great because they were the only game in town, and it turns out being the only game in town is great.
Well, why wouldn't you want the heat?
Oh yeah,
the additional attention that you get from the monthly release. It's one of the things that serial television is having to deal with now. By everybody's having to decide: do you dump the entire season at once, or do you do what CBS has done with
Discovery.
Obviously a show I've been working with, with Discovery or Picard or whatever, by doling it out once a week the regular way. Which gets more attention? Which gets more traffic?
It's interesting, yeah. Well, okay, 2 more questions on the yearly numbers. Now, one thing I think is really fascinating about this stuff, and you have to deal with it all the time, and you're a great arbiter of trying to balance this stuff out, but it's very easy for narratives to form one way or another in regards to this. One of the funniest things about, like, if you take the URL to Comichron's yearly report and you put it in a Twitter search, you will find like 200 people being like, and I thought comic shops were dying, or comic industry was dying, and stuff like that. And it was like everyone saying the exact same tweet. And I'm like, I get it. I get it. Like, people are stupid. But at the same time, it's just like, it is really fascinating how quickly numbers, like what you're saying is like a minimum subjective, or there's a mix of objective and subjective. There's all these different things to it, are using it for like very specific narratives. And that leads to my question. Like, what do you think the biggest misunderstandings of this data and how it's being used is, if there is anything?
Biggest misunderstanding. I think I said this the last time I was on. I think that people need to actually read the notes behind it so that they'll know what we're talking about.
That's exhausting, John. That's
Yeah,
exhausting.
I know, but the detail is there for a reason because people trip over it constantly. It's almost we're trying to get everything that we can get into a small graphic. We're trying to get everything that we can get into a press release. And there's just a lot of nuance to things that is not easily capturable. I think there's a very great degree to which this year's sales will always look a lot like last year's, pandemic accepted. This is a machine. We shovel money in, we pull money out. We shovel money in, we pull money out. The wild swings that people keep thinking that they're going to be out there this way or that, they tend not to happen just because that's not how business works.
Right.
And so, when we hit the sky is falling period of 2017, that's what you were hearing from people. The sky is falling. I was like, no, this still looks a lot like, the last couple of years. I mean, maybe we're off a few points. Maybe we're off 10 points. We were off 10 points. But again, I didn't see anything fundamental that had changed.
Sure.
And to the delivery systems or to anything else. Everything about how the comic book works as a delivery system for content still works today. Everything about how the direct market works, still worked up until the end of March. And now it's being restarted in ways that we're trying to work out. It looks like everything, that worked before as far as selling physical books, still works. But obviously there's different parts of the system that are having to be started up at different times. What I have said as well is 2020, I can't help you.
Yeah. Good luck.
Well, I have a sense of what's going to be available, and I can just tell everybody now, I'm not going to be running comparatives between 2020 and 2019, 2018, 20 whatever. Look, we got our first reorders for advanced reorders for August comics today. That's the stuff that's the data that's been going up on the website regularly still because Diamond's been putting it out. So the first August numbers. And if this had been a normal year, I would be right now telling people, all right, don't expect there to be a huge month year to year in August 2020 because we're starting to get into the Hoxpox months.
Mm-hmm.
We're starting to get into the House of X, period, and the comparatives are going to be challenging. And of course, we would always worry about, well, this month's got 4 weeks versus 5 weeks and stuff like that. We are so far beyond worrying about 4 weeks versus 5 weeks, so far beyond worrying about Hoxpox. We're now worrying about, okay, this time last year, all the stores were open.
Right. I mean, look at California.
This time last year, we had one distributor serving everybody that had reorders available on just about everything. This year, it's going to be anybody's guess for a while. And I've used this description before. It reminds me of the reason that I dropped out of grad school with just my master's. It was because I could not finish my Soviet studies doctorate because the Soviet Union collapsed. and I repeatedly reused the joke that it collapsed on my dissertation. But it was true that everything that I was studying vanished.
Yeah.
And I was told, well, you can still study it. And I said, well, I think this is now in the realm of the journalists.
Yeah.
For 2-3 years, all that we can say about this place is going to come from people who are reporting on it that minute.
Right.
And it's going to be 5-10 years before we're really going to know what happened this year. And I think we're kind of there now, that we're not going to really understand 2020 in comics for a few years yet.
Well, and I think it's like the comparison makes, not doing comparisons makes total sense. It'd be like comparing the upcoming 60-game baseball season to previous 162-game baseball seasons. I guess you could like project outwards based off of the numbers, but at the same time,
No, it's beyond an asterisk.
yeah,
It's beyond that, and I can tell you that everybody, this may predict a question you might have about going forward with regard to DC's distributors.
sales. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a plan. I know, about my colleagues' plans with regard to if they don't come out with the same level of information that Diamond does once Diamond is running with its information again. And I do believe Diamond will begin running again. But there are plans to deal with that, and I know how I would approach each of these things so that we would still have sort of a general idea of what's going on. I would be reluctant, though, having been through this before 25 years ago, to really put too much historical stock in it, and so I'm going to be not struggling, but I'm going to be looking closely at how much time I want to put in on certain estimates that I think might not stand the test of time. I did something. Comichron started when the Comichron monthly distributor sales chart database started when I approached Marvel about getting the Heroes World numbers, or they approached me. We both approached each other about getting the Heroes World numbers and the Diamond numbers together. Mm-hmm. This was after a 16-month or so period where we had no data on what everybody had, what everything was selling. In that period, though, I was already doing something else. We were using Comics Retailer Magazine. We were sending every month a business reply card. It was a big fold-over thing to all of our readers, saying, "Tell us everything that you sold last month and tell us the units."
Oh my God!
And it was like the top 30 or whatever, but it was also the top 30 comics, top 30 graphic novels. And so we were running then, and we continued to run for about 10 years. This chart that said, here's what we believe sold. Here's what percentage of our retailers put it in their top 30. Here's what they averaged. And it was better than nothing. But once the actual real numbers started, these two charts don't really talk to each other as well as they could.
Yeah.
And because they tell different things. One tells what a retailer intended to do, and one tells what happened actually at the street.
Right.
And so, we'll just have to see. I know that Comic Hub has the ability to do sell-through charts. I've dabbled in sell-through stuff myself before, and I guess that thing with Comics Retailer was part of that too. But I think it's telling you something different.
Totally.
And it also you get into a lot of problems of apples to apples. Are you really looking at the same time frame? Are you really looking at the same titles? And I think there's a real danger of people mixing sales to retailers and sales to consumers in the same chart. I think that's not good at all.
Well, they would have to be separate charts for sure. I mean, it is interesting because I know BookScan had that deal with, or has a deal with, Comic Hubs. I wonder, is that number? Those numbers are supposed to start next year, right?
I don't know specifics on that. I can simply tell you that you would not be able, for example, to let's say you had a Diamond chart with just the Diamond sales figures to retailers. You would not be able to take a chart that was sales by retailers to consumers for one company or every company in America, for every store in America. You would not be able to put those two in the same chart and have it sync up.
Yeah,
it's not going to sync up.
It's apples to Lexuses. They're not, or Lexi. I have no idea what a plural for Lexus is.
And as far as I know, BookScan doesn't care about what's sold to retailers.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't know. It's all really interesting. I mean, it's funny because like every time I think about this, I always think of something different in how, like, for example, DC divorcing from Diamond and going with Lunar and UCS as their sole distributors, or double sole distributors. I mean, there's so many odd things about it. It's like you were talking about the sales charts, like there's that, or the really fascinating thing to me is like, what's going to be the new Batman? What's going to be your new frame of reference for contextualizing everything? Because, for listeners that don't know, the way that it's always been done is like Batman is like the measuring stick for everything else, and it's kind of how no.
But it wasn't though.
I mean,
It wasn't.
okay, it has been
Yeah.
in recent memory. What was
Yeah, no,
before?
in recent memory, DC went with Batman when, or rather, Diamond went with Batman when DC went exclusive. Before that, it was Uncanny X-Men.
Oh, well, maybe I would say it could be Uncanny now, but Uncanny doesn't exist.
Or
So.
actually, it is. I can't remember which is which. I think either Capital was Uncanny X-Men and maybe Capital was Uncanny X-Men and Diamond was Amazing Spider-Man.
Oh, okay.
And if you were to pick one now, I think I did some tweets about this. I said I would go with Amazing Spider-Man.
It's weird though, because Amazing Spider-Man isn't like it's. I talked. I mean, a few years.
It doesn't matter whether it's the top book.
It's consistent.
It's whether it's a consistent book.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. Well, so I did want to ask. This pandemic year has obviously been very strange. I mean, we haven't had. When was the last sales chart? March, technically.
Yeah, March was the final one.
So I would like to suggest you've had free time. I'm guessing that's not the case. What projects have you taken on during this to kind of build out Comichron a bit and try to give a more robust vision of all this stuff, given the fact that there's not new things coming in?
Well, after we got through the panic of the pandemic setting in, because I did a lot. I'm not a journalist anymore in that sense of chasing the news, but I was for a while doing a lot of posts. And then when the DC thing happened, it became here's historical pieces about what happened then. 25 years ago, almost exactly when this happened, and then when DC went completely there, I've been doing a lot of calculations on how much money DC actually got from Diamond last year, or stood to make from Diamond last year, and how they're probably even absent a pandemic, I don't think you can get that from these other two distributors. I have sought refuge in the past. Not being able to tell people much about 2020, I've had all these side projects over the years that have been nursed along. One was nearing completion anyway. I have now almost all the circulation statements that appear in the comics. I'm down to less than 20 that I'm missing from the actual comics themselves. These are these charts that are in the magazines that have they're these statements that once a year they report how many copies they sold, and then I also have a batch of data that I've gotten from my trips to the Audit Bureau of Circulation headquarters to photograph all of their or many of their statements, both the publisher statements to advertisers and also the ABC's audits of those publisher sales. I had not been able to actually do anything with that material. I had thousands of these images over the, that I've had in files sitting basically since 2017. I took this time to go through them all, and I now can account. Well, what I did was I took them together, and I've developed a method that combines both sources of data with a third data source that I have built on my own over the last few years. What days all the comics came out. I did not pull it from the very good work at Mike's Amazing Comics. I did it all myself. These three things I have connected together in it's sort of like building a Rubik's Cube and getting the Rubik's Cube to the point where you can use the squares on it as a Sudoku. And since then, it has been that because I have figured out I have good estimates now for almost 7,000 comics from the early 1960s, good estimates on individual single issues, accounting for close to 2 billion comic books.
My God, John,
and,
I just want to say, I mean this with respect, but you're a maniac.
I keep thinking I'm done. and I'm nowhere near. I'm nowhere near. I mean, it's because everything causes problems. Marvel, DC would be DC would be reporting sales to advertisers bi-monthly. Marvel would be reporting monthly. DC would move titles from one basket of advertiser titles to another, but they wouldn't tell us which one it was, and I would have to work on that. I'm finding which publishers are fly by night and which publishers are really accurate about how they do. I've been able to demonstrate a number of things that once I'm ready to publish, all this information will be something people can hopefully refer to. But I've nodded to a few things so far. One is that the statements of ownership, despite the fact that Dick Giordano said that in the late 60s Charlton was making them up, for everybody else, they seem to be correct.
Mm-hmm.
They seem to be conforming with the numbers that not just the publishers were reporting to the audit bureau, but that the audit bureau was auditing when they physically went in and looked at the records at the distributors, looked at the records at the publishers. They're a little high, the statements, but they would be because when they filed those reports, they didn't have sales returns back on a number of the issues. The most recent issues, they would have thought they sold more copies of because they don't have returns on yet.
Oh my God.
So that was the first thing. The second thing, and this is again something we always knew sort of, but the statements of ownership report an annual figure. This is what the average for the year was. I want to get individual issues. Well, I had looked at a while I probably spent a month working on ways with a friend of mine, Greg Holland, to create a system that would project sales across time for individual issues, paying some attention to seasonality. But as I got further into it, I realized that the seasonality was far more than I had suspected, that it varied to a degree from publisher to publisher. The kids' comics were very summer friendly, very winter scarce. And Marvel and DC, the serialized comics were much more regular in terms of their sales, but even so, they were extremely bumpy. And so I added that to the model, and I have been refining this model, and it has brought forward some information that I think if people are going to look at these charts and if their assumptions are going to be challenged immediately, because they're going to see, for example, let's take a book like Sad Sack, which is not a great comic book, but it was popular. It was very popular. If you look at, say, the February issue in 1961, it did 200,000 comics.
Wow.
Copies. And by February, I mean shipping in February, different from the cover date. So 200,000. Well, the August issue sold 260,000. And you would look at that and you would say, wow, Sad Sack must have gotten really popular. This is a bi-monthly book. It's just 3 issues later. It's up 60,000 copies. Well, the February 62 issue is 170,000. And that's because 2 things. It's February.
Yeah, seasonality.
Seasonality was huge. You'll have titles like Archie, which would go bi-monthly in the winter and twice monthly in the summer, because that's where the kids were.
They're riding their bikes and going to places they could buy it on the newsstand.
That's exactly right. And so if you were to try to break, any one of these annual sales figures up into 12, you'd have wrong information. And significantly wrong information. The other factor which is in there, which you've got to account for, is what else is happening in 1961. Comics go from 10 cents to 12 cents. So that impacts the sales in there as well. And in particular, the nightmare publisher has been Dell, which in 1961 goes from 10 cents to 15 cents, causing its sales to go absolutely just ridiculous. I mean, Walt Disney Comics and Stories goes from like 1.3 million to 900,000 the next year to 460,000 the next year.
Ugh.
Just because they went from 10 to 15 cents. It was a blunder. It was a historic blunder. And then almost immediately after that, after they realized they made a mistake, they split the company in two.
Yeah.
And it becomes Dell and it becomes Golkey. And believe me, one thing that mathematical models don't like is
Immense variance.
Yeah, well, just a lot of weird, crazy stuff happening. However, that said, the model has been able to predict a lot of things, a lot of correct numbers or close to correct numbers, because I have other sources where I've got the real data.
Yeah.
And it also has been able to guide me to, this title was not included because this title has no ads.
Yeah. Well, so if I'm going to do a horrible thing. I'm going to make two requests. And this doesn't have to be now. This can be way down the line. One, I think that people don't realize the seasonality now, because there is a seasonality. Beginning of the year is always lower.
It's not. Well, okay, finish your request.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I don't know if that's something that maybe you already have it on the site, but like some sort of like rough seasonality where people can be like, look, February is a disaster. Because, like, let's be honest, people don't read as much as they should when you put up these posts where you explain that seasonality is an important thing for January, February, March, et cetera, et cetera. But
this is the important coda to this. This is the finding from this.
Right.
The direct market solved seasonality.
Did it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. The direct market solved seasonality. Pull boxes solved seasonality. What solves it? Why were comics so much lumpier in sales over time than Newsweek?
No predictability.
It was because they had subscribers.
Yeah.
So they had far more subscribers. TV Guide had millions of subscribers. Their sales in January were similar to their sales in July. Comic shops create a subscription model for most of the copies sold.
Yeah. So the other thing is purely functional, and I know this exists at the very bottom of each monthly thing. As a person who does so much like data stuff on through Comichron, if you had like a floating button to go the next month, right now what I do is I type in like 5, or like I go to 05 for May, and then I do 06 for June instead of scrolling all the way to the bottom. That's all I'm going to say. A floating one. Like something that floats along where you can click that, and I'd be like, oh my god, that would be so much easier.
There's two nav buttons on the bottom of the page and upper left kind of hidden.
Oh, I've seen the upper left one.
Yeah, it's up near the year. I need to put those kind of widgets in. That's one of the other pandemic things that I'm dealing with. I am finally going to take the blog off of. Right now the blog is offsite on Blogger, and it's just feeding onto the website. One of the things I'm going to do, I'm putting that on WordPress, and it's going to be on within the site itself. It's just there's hundreds of posts to do. It's been waiting for a month where I had nothing to do to do that. So yes, that is one of the things that I will be adding. And of course, the reason for that is that in its drive to kill every product it buys, Google has made Blogger unusable. Yeah,
that is really unfortunate. I started on Blogger. Well, just a few more questions. I did want to ask. You mentioned a little bit ago about how Diamond. You wrote about some of the stuff involving Diamond and DC, and you tweeted about it just, I think just last week or this week or something, where you said, you talked about how Diamond was DC's largest buyer by far, sharing that, print comic books, 115 million, which was 61% of the whole, graphic novels sold through Diamond was 40 million, 21%, et cetera, et cetera. Now, this is you don't have insight into the inner workings of Diamond, but I know one question at the top of a lot of people's brains about DC divorcing Diamond is, what does that mean for the health of Diamond? Like, how confident in the health of Diamond are you?
Well, I when the outbreak happened, I did a post which was I specifically called it "The Case for Hope" at 2 a.m. I think it was because that's when I wrote it. trying to get into all of the things that I thought were strengths of the business that would keep it reliable going forward. And by that point, that post was inspired by the fact that Diamond had just shut down. And I one of the assumptions that I put in there was that I said before anything has to happen, this presumes a American economy that has been sufficiently floated by the Federal Reserve, including the consumers and all the business, not just the businesses, but also the consumers.
Yeah.
And that did not happen.
No.
To a degree, the pandemic payments to businesses, definitely saved a lot, but they were limited in terms of what they could go to. It was not the same thing as it happened in some places in Europe, where basically they said, we're going to float every company in this period. And the thing is, the Federal Reserve has the ability to really do a lot of exotic things. I mean, they could basically take a position, a non-voting position in the financial lives of every American if they wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the same way that you did the bank bailout. You do something in some way, shape, or form that subsidizes, takes a share in every American as a corporation, but it's a non-voting share and it will never pay out.
Right.
So I presume that there would be a lot more money dumped on the economy than there was. There was enough dumped on it to stabilize the stock market, and that's great. And to keep unemployment from continuing to rocket. But particularly as we get into these summer months and this story is not over, it's just hard to know. It's hard to see. With regard to Diamond specifically, I mean, one of the things I think, by coming out and speaking as often as he did in April and May and June, one of the things that Steve was able to confirm that we all sort of knew was, what Diamond was making from DC had not changed in years and years and years. Same for Marvel. Those companies are brokerage accounts. Diamond gets a fee for moving their books. It's not like Diamond wound up sitting on a lot of unsold DC inventory it can't get rid of. Those books are owned by DC.
Right.
Diamond is just Diamond is flooring those books. They're a service. Unless something has changed in the last number of years since I was keeping track of that. That's how it works. It's so Diamond's take on that. If you figure that on that 155 million, DC's making about 60 from products moving through Diamond. Diamond's share of that is significant. It's almost certainly more than 10% of its revenue, but it's not necessarily going to be 20.
Right.
I'm not sure. And here's the thing, which is getting back to the pandemic and everything else. It's going to be very difficult right now, and maybe this is why you do the thing that you do if you're DC now. It's very, very difficult to tell whether something has succeeded or failed.
Sure.
In this environment, because DC is not going to replace its $155 million with Lunar and UCS. I just don't think it's possible, given the infrastructure, given the number of retailers that have said, yeah, we're not doing it at all, or that we're not going to be full-throated support of this, or that have said, no reorders. We're not going to do reorders. We're just going to do the initial order. They were going to be very, very challenged to make the same money in 2020, absent a pandemic. However, that presumes that was what their intention was. And secondly, when the pandemic is in play, you don't know whether it worked or not.
Yeah. Well, and the funny thing is initially I was like, this is a horrible time. So many retailers I talked to, this is like a horrible time to do this. But when you look at it in a lot of ways, it's actually the best time you could possibly do it. You said one of the reasons, but also it's just like when things are chaos, it's like easier to make these kinds of changes because especially because like most of the industry was shut, the industry was closed. Basically, it's like why not do it when like nobody's doing anything? It's like I've seen a lot of. What's that?
I was going to say, however, this goes back to the first distributor wars. In Comics Retailer, we were contacted in '95, I believe it was, or early '96, by Jewel Gassenheimer and Frank Houston, two professors from Rutgers in Kentucky that were working on a study of disruptions in supply chains and how it made the people at the bottom of the supply chain feel. And we participated as a magazine in that. We sent every retailer in our readership a very elaborate survey saying how they felt about Marvel, how they felt about DC, how they felt about Image, how they felt about Diamond, how they felt about Capital, how they felt about everything that had happened and how it had changed. And they ended up doing a report. San Diego, I guess it was San Diego Expo. I think it was either 96 or 97 when the report was out. We had the executives from Marvel, DC, Diamond, and Capital there. And I remember the Marvel president walked out in the middle of it, scared the hell out of me because I thought he wasn't coming back. because what they found was that deep and lasting damage had been done by Marvel acting unilaterally with Heroes World.
Yeah.
And as one retailer that I talked to, and again, forget this anecdotal business of I should not even do that. I'm not even going to go into what individual retailers tell me, but I can tell you there will be some surveys that would come back if this had been done again in this year, where people are going to be deeply unhappy with various companies in the business.
Oh yeah,
and some people will be satisfied.
Oh yeah, but I did like kind of a power rankings based off of conversations I had with a lot of retailers, and like it's back in like April, even I think probably before Lunar UCS. Like I would say that Marvel and DC were by far at the bottom of that list, and for varying reasons. But anyways, well, we only have a little bit of time left. I want to bring up one subject that's going to be a real. I know it's not really the book market world is more Milton's area, but you're conversant on it. I had a random thought. It's not a good thought. I apologize in advance because it's a bad thought. But I was thinking about The Walking Dead and how at its high time, Image was like this hot item or hot company on the book market, because they were just blowing up on that. And now they're really down because there's no Walking Dead and there's no Saga. And it made me think about Dogman. And it made me think about 8 of the 10 best-selling books in the book scan market are Dogman. Do you think it's possible we're in a Dogman bubble?
Well, whenever you're relying on a single title, it definitely happens. It's definitely there, and I think the other thing that and this was provoked in a number of I would say the number 2 thing that people commented, other than hey, look, the industry is doing a lot better than you think it is, when our report came out. Is there are people that come out and say, yeah, but should that stuff really count?
That is, that's stupid.
Well, no, but they very regularly. It's because this news stepped on the story of the collapse of the comics industry.
Yeah, the narrative of doom and gloom, right?
Well, but remember, they're only talking about a specific subset of the comics industry, that particular portion that they don't like.
Right.
And again, they're saying, well, this other stuff shouldn't count. And I think this is why we do multiple different categories. This is why we let you look at whichever category you want and figure it out. But are we in a Dogman bubble? I don't know. Particularly the what percentage it is. I'd have to go back and look.
16% of the book scan market.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot, but then you'd also because Image was never that much.
No.
Walking Dead. For a while, Walking Dead alone, in the direct market, In like 2013 or 2014, Walking Dead alone was 2.5% of the market.
Yeah.
So it would have been the fourth largest publisher, or fifth largest publisher, or something like that after Dark Horse, just on its own. But it was never that huge. But look, what does the again? This is what it comes to when I say that this year looks like last year. What this market proved was that there was $1.21 billion to be spent on the right material.
Right.
And Dogman proves that money existed for the right material. We have to keep that money in the business, even if Dogman goes away.
Well, and it also, that my hypothetical situation, my idea of a bubble, presumes that something wouldn't theoretically replace that. Because kids are clearly into this stuff. I mean, like, I'm just waiting. I mean, Kazuo Kibuishi's Amulet is already popular. I'm waiting for it to become a super sensation. I mean, it is a super sensation, but like a Dogman level one, because I love it. But I mean, I will say, like, speaking to all of this, like one thing that people forget when they think about, like, when they start going doom and gloom about the pandemic is, at least we were coming from a position of strength going into 2020. Oh, yeah. That makes a huge difference.
Oh yeah, no, I've said if this happened in 2018, we would be in worse shape because there was less money.
Right.
There was less money. It had come off a bad year for the direct market. But no, I talked to just my one of my local retailers here on Saturday. He says the winter through March was lights out. I mean, it was great.
Mm-hmm.
They were doing very, very well, and then this. So yeah, you don't want to have this happen ever. But one thing we can say for sure is next time there is a disruption on this level, whether it's from the comet hitting or
no, don't bring that bad voodoo into this podcast, John.
Well, I'm a science fiction writer. I can imagine a lot of different things. Whatever happens, we'll have a model for it. Part of what was wrong was there was no comparative information. We had no way of turning off Diamond. We had no way of turning off the business.
Right.
I mean, we had to figure this out, and it stranded money at different places in the business at different times,
mm-hmm.
and it stranded books at different places at different times. Whatever happens, we will have at least an example of maybe what to do, maybe what not to do, and we might get some emergency models that deal with a stoppage of comics for more than 2 weeks.
Sure,
because we had never had a stoppage for more than 2 weeks before that.
What was it? 9, 8?
It was a bit. And,
yeah.
I went back to look at the UPS strike in '97, and Diamond was able to actually go around setting up in parking lots. They would drive trucks to places and unload the books.
I bet they didn't come to Alaska.
I don't think they went to Alaska. But they were able to tide people over, and it turned out not to be impactful. You couldn't do that this time.
No.
And if there are more than one part of the supply chain is closed, forget it. You can't do business.
Yeah.
So whatever criticisms there are, and yes, some distributors stayed open, some printers stayed open. Just try to change that on a dime. Try to change who you're going with just like that. Then it can't be done.
It's tough. Okay, let's close with some of your writing. It's a big day for you because you're nominated for a Scribe Award, which we're going to find out in 3 hours, 2.5 hours.
Something like that. Well, the good news is people like the book, so there you go.
That's good. But the other good news is yesterday you had a new book come out, Star Trek Discovery: Die Standing. We kind of alluded to the fact you're working with Discovery. So what's the story there? I mean, like, you said that, like, you're kind of working with them. Is this something that kind of stems from the showrunners on that, and then you kind of flesh it out, or like, what's the story with Die Standing?
Well, both Die Standing and last year's Scribe nominated book, The Enterprise War, both of these are books where I worked with Kirsten Beyer of the Star Trek Discovery Writers Room. She's one of the co-creators on Picard, and she had been and she actually still is, one of our stable of authors. So she kind of became their person there to be one of the go-betweens. To let us know, okay, here's what's coming up in the show. Here's characters that can use elaboration. If what we're writing is not canonical, it's certainly very canon adjacent. Names of on-screen names of characters have come from the fiction because we wrote it first, and then they knew about it and they used it. And so, for example, the Enterprise War was about where Captain Pike and Spock and Enterprise were during the first season of Discovery, and it interlocks perfectly with what we see on screen. Same here for the book Die Standing. This is Michelle Yeoh's character, Emperor Georgiou. She played two roles, both the captain that we see at the beginning of the series, and also the Mirror Universe Emperor, who pops up at the end of the first season in our universe and is recruited by the spy organization Section 31. My story was telling what happened to her between that first and second seasons. How her first mission for Section 31 and how it goes so horribly wrong, because you don't just bring the Emperor of the Mirror Universe into our universe and just give him a job. Her goal is to reestablish her regime in our universe, and so I got to tell this big sprawling story that takes her a lot of places and takes her emotionally through this arc of dealing with the fact that she has lost more than any person has ever lost in the history of loss. She was the emperor of the Terran Empire in the Mirror Universe, and yet now she's an individual.
Yeah.
And so there's that dynamic. There's the fish out of water dynamic. I got to include a number of characters from Star Trek history that had not actually been seen before. One of the precursors to the Dax character that we see in Deep Space Nine, she is here. Happens to discover she happens to discover a great weapon that Emperor Georgiou was looking for in her own universe, and she was deprived of it. Well, now she gets another chance. And so again, it's the book is a lot of fun. Michelle's character in the TV series is extremely sarcastic, extremely snarky. There's a lot of innuendo that we would not normally do in a Star Trek book that is in this. This book is almost entirely told from the point of view of her. And there is no villain proper because she could be the villain. It is a lot of fun.
It sounds it. I really love how, I'm going to bring up something else you did. I'm a huge Star Wars Rebels fan. And you did Star Wars A New Dawn, which is a Rebels prequel of a sort starring Kanan Jarrus and Harrison Dula, with a foreword by Dave Filoni, which is like, Dave Filoni is like on my Mount Rushmore of desired guests on the show, just so I can just be like, how are you so amazing? Anyways, but I love how people get to play around in these kind of
sandboxes.
Yeah, it's like the sandboxes, but it's in like the areas that are normally not like dug into. It's interesting because I actually think a really fascinating comic right now is Deceased over at DC, in that they're doing kind of a similar thing with some of their stuff where it's like this main story, but then they have all these side stories that wouldn't normally be told in like one shots and miniseries and digital first titles. And it's like you get to dig in and get into some of like the emotional spots and get into some of the really interesting character stuff that you don't normally see on shows because they don't have time for an entire season about this character. And I find that fascinating.
Well, that was one of the challenges with Die Standing, is that by her actions that we see on screen, no Federation in its right mind would give this woman a job. One of the admiral says that she's like an invasive species. She should not be in this universe, much less be a spy. So I got to explain that. I got to tell how that came about and what the story was. And we exist more than just to tie things together. We're not just there to connect the dots.
Oh, right.
But because we're trying to tell a story at the same time. But I think it's we're making best use of the franchise and making a lot better use of it than we were in the past. I mean, the history of tie-in novels and tie-in fiction it goes all the way back to the Lone Ranger
Mm-hmm.
and the radio show. And the creator of the radio show did the novels, wrote the novels, and there was never an expectation for decades that what happened in the pages of the comics or the novels would ever feed back onto the TV screen or the movie screen or the radio broadcast at all. It was always assumed to be just one more licensed property, one more T-shirt, one more toy. And it comes about organically. In the 70s, you have in comics, in Star Wars, you have Archie Goodwin, who is also writing the comic strip for Star Wars and adapting the Brian Daley novels, the Han Solo novels. Begins using elements from those novels in his regular comic strip and assuming that they were part of the universe. And this gets to the point where in the early 90s, when Timothy Zahn was given the chance to write the Heir to the Empire novels, the first thing they did was they sent him a complete set of the West End Star Wars role-playing game.
Wow.
Because they had done all the world building in the meantime. There are elements on movie screens that come from these games, that come from these things. And of course now, beginning with New Dawn, the special thing about that book, or the trivial thing, I guess now, is that it was the first book that was written in concert with the Star Wars writers group, the Lucasfilm writers group, story group is what they call it.
Even in like the Disney era.
Yeah, in the Disney era, they call it the Disney Story Group, or the Lucasfilm Story Group, and my novel was advised. Parts of it were, when I could set the novel was suggested by Filoni and company. Filoni read the treatise. He made suggestions. We did a conference call on what Kanan Jarrus was supposed to be like. I think the word cowboy was used. Anybody who knows Dave Filoni, he wears a cowboy hat. So it's everything going forward with New Dawn is considered to have happened in the Star Wars universe. Star Trek, this is again different from previous works where I can never say specific things that will be coming up on screen, but there may be specific things will be coming up on screen that are in the book.
Yeah. Well, last question for you, and you can't answer it probably, but I don't care. I'm going to ask it anyways. You're writing from a certain point of view, The Empire Strikes Back, which is another anthology of short stories that celebrate, The Empire Strikes Back for its 40th anniversary. Cough once if it's Chopper from Rebels. Cough twice if it isn't.
I have been told that I cannot say what I'm doing.
I figured. That's why I said you couldn't answer. I was just trying to get you to tell me what was Chopper.
I'll say this. People will be excited.
It's Star Wars. Of course we will be.
Well, there's some things will excite people more than others. Random Huguenot number 7 would not excite people as much as what I've done.
No.
When I did the Certain Point of View book, they allowed me to bring back a character from Star Wars Kenobi, and that was just delightful. Mm-hmm. Because that's technically Legends now, but that character is now sort of canon adjacent.
It's so funny how that stuff works. I mean, like. Yeah. I was going to say Star Trek is kind of similar to like DC in some ways, and they have all these different universes. But I guess with the like Legends and everything, it's all kind of like that. But
well, Star Trek is easier because they got time travel.
Yeah. The time travel makes nothing easier. Time travel makes nothing easier.
Well, the time travel in alternate universes, you can do just about anything. I mean, the Prime universe in Star Trek and the movie universe, as they call it, the Kelvin universe. They coexist. They're actually now publishing novels again based on the movie universe that had been held up for years because Simon and Schuster hadn't worked out the rights with Bad Robot. But now, I mean, they're just one more part of the Star Trek universe since CBS and Viacom, merged with Paramount and all the other this and that and the other.
It's all wild. It's all crazy. But John, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about the year in comics. All the years in comics and, Star Trek, Star Wars, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you having me. And my hope is that when we do this next time, I will both have my information from the deep past published, and that we'll have some idea about what's going on in the present.
And that we're not in a pandemic. Fingers crossed.
Oh gosh.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with Comichron's John Jackson Miller. You can find him on Twitter, Facebook, and his work at Comichron and in the newly released Star Trek Discovery Die Standing. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all of the site's content and its members only forum. And if you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched. That's SKTCHD. Following it on Instagram at @SketchComic, or following it on Twitter at @SketchComic, or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to my existing patrons, including SB, Antonio Offen, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Scotty Young, Susanna Polo, Jeff Weira, Greed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, AbductedTheComic.com, Andrew Carita, Matt Mahoney, Charlie Chu, Stephen Hall, Dan Lee, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Estlin, Philip Merritt, Christian Sheldon, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachala, Torrin Grumbeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Harry Sayer, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slates, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kingus, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vidya Yala, Atara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinell, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Pluto, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Brawley, Ira James Udaskin, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fabian, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris Hallren, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.